To the Q&A and critique number 38. We're about to go over a number of different things and take it easy. Yeah. Just give me a second. There's someone in the background here. Decap is already and he's all alive. So today we've got a number of different topics. If you guys were here from last week, it was kind of interesting talking about our different things. What do you guys remember? Nope, okay, don't worry. So today we're going to take a look in 3 or 4 major topics. The first one is the grease pencil Lineart modifiers for performance and how to bake it. So for example, if you have a character and you have a lot of grease pencil stuff, sometimes the Lineart modifier, even though it's dynamic to the camera, it can be a little bit slow. So sometimes when you do, it's better to bake it out and like set up your Lineart onto your characters first before you start actually using it for animation. And also I'm going to do a quick little walkthrough and introduction of how to do Lineart for character rigs. So for example, it's not that obvious of how you would rig and weight your grease pencils to your characters. So I'll just do a quick little walkthrough here. And then from there, I'm going to teach you some batch object, I guess you could say merging and preparation, and how to and also how to, like, for example, bake your geometry nodes. So sorry about the background. So for example, back in the day I used to celebrate the concept of geometry nodes because it was something that I really needed for game asset design, which was merging your collections. Come on, 1 second, guys. Sorry about that, guys. There was just somebody here just saying goodbye. My girlfriend's brother. So hopefully that's okay. You guys didn't pick up too much of that, hopefully, right?
Yeah, we can't actually hear it. You can hear it, but we can't actually hear what's what's driving you nuts.
Alright, sorry about that. So it's like I have my noise cancellation and my noise threshold is quite high, so that's probably why. Good. Right, so thank you for being patient. But as I was saying, for game assets and for baking data, for example, using live geometry nodes within production is actually very slow. So sometimes it's better to bake out your procedural geometry, to freeze it, and then re-import it or use it in your layout without actually using live trees. So I'll be teaching how to do that quickly, especially with Blender 3.2, because I'm not sure if 3.1 has this. And the next thing we're going to take a look at, I'll give you guys a quick little album arts and song art and environment update for the Painterly project at the end. So you guys ready?
Yeah.
Yeah!
Whoa, awesome, man.
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, cool. So what do you guys know about grease pencil? Do you guys know how to use the Lineart modifier, or should I start from the basics up? So from what level should I walk you guys through with this Lineart baking tutorial, I guess you could say, or showcase or walkthrough? Have you done anything with grease pencil before? Decap is right.
I've actually never touched the grease pencil in Blender, not even once.
Now Decap says he's pretty comfortable with it. Oh, really? That's surprising. Darren just gave me a quick little video actually just before we were beginning, where another artist with his short film was using it to draw basic concepts and designs, and then he used more solid brushes and converted them to geometry to kind of sketch out a concept very similar to what you would do with like quill, or what is it called, those VR pen drawing stuff. Decap also mentions for the grease pencil, a Jammer Durabeave grease pencil tutorials helped a lot. So basically what I'm going to do here is I have a character, and what I need is some pencil lines or sketch lines, I guess you could say, drawn into the character. So let's just quickly bring out an idea here that I showed last week, I think. So I have a 3D model and I have this animated lines on top of the model. But as you can see, the performance is really fast because I'm tumbling the viewport live while the animation is playing, and I can see these lines. When you're using the Lineart modifier, which is a grease pencil modifier, this is usually not very fast, and the more complex the grease pencil, the more slow it becomes. It's not very performant. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to teach you how to do this, how to bake it down, which is an interesting technique. But it looks like fun, so we're going to use something like this type of technique here, with the lines that are on the geometry, and we're going to bake it in so that this could be performant and also rigged on characters like this one, or our current character here in 3D. Okay, so first things first, you need to create a grease pencil. So if you're in the add menu, you'd go down to the grease pencil, just create a stroke, or you can also create a collection line art. So the way a collection line art is the one that we want to use most. Collection line art is basically the same modifier with everything already set up. So we have this stack here. If we kind of zoom in a little bit so you guys can see, we have the Lineart modifier, we have a collection, and the source type. One could be a single object, a whole entire scene, which is not going to be performant at all because that's absolutely everything, or just a collection. So here we have this collection called blockhead number 3, and that's the one we're going to use. Blockhead number 3. And now if we go into the camera and take a look at the head, as you can see, performance has already dropped to almost nothing. So 1 second. Let me just hide it. So this is my performance without the Lineart modifier. And now if we take a look at the blockhead 3 and maybe grab his eyebrow or something. Oh, that's a cutout. So just unlink that one. Here it is. No, it's the body. Where's his head? There it is. Right, so we have the head here, and this whole body. Game head. These are the objects. Okay, cool. So let me just hide this and make sure this is in the correct collection. Yep, I don't need it. This is in the rig. And this should be in the rig. There we go. So keep it nice and minimal. So if we show back to the Lineart modifier here, and we turn it back on again, as you can see, here it is with little performance, very low performance, even though we can't see it because we need to configure some things first. But if we turn it off, here it is with the performance that we would probably need. We need something like this, where you can tumble the viewport, pose your characters and everything. But with the Lineart modifier, it's not going to work. And so why do we use something like Freestyle or some other shader-based line art? The reason being is because sometimes when you rig your line art, you want it with specific lines and specific areas on your character that the line art system would not predict clearly. So for example, I might want to draw a line here and rig that line on the nose and move it around over the nose or over the eyes, or have the specific contour on just the jaw but no lines on the ears, for example. The Lineart modifier allows me to bake this data nice and quickly, and then I can draw it in elsewhere. But if I use something like Freestyle, I don't have that type of control, and I can't preview it in the viewport. So the Lineart modifier gives me some ability to save time drawing the grease pencil, but it's not performant, and that's a big issue. So let's first clean up the Lineart stuff just to make sure that everything is okay, that we can see it. So when I'm in the Lineart, I have a layer, which is my grease pencil layer. So if we go into 2D animation, layout, which you can use in your workspaces when you create a new workspace or when you add a new workspace. From here, you can go inside 2D animation and choose 2D animation or 2D full canvas. I like the 2D animation one. And this will give you a panel for lines, which is kind of like your layers. And then you have your grease pencil material, right? So we're going to take a look at the grease pencil material. We got the black stroke. It's solid, but we still can't see anything. So let's just make sure it's working. And my radius is either really small or really big. Where is it? I'm just going to turn off the modifier for a moment. And just delete that. Why isn't it drawing? 1 second. It's always when things are under pressure, it doesn't work. Well, that's okay. Oh, I know why.
Andreas, is your mic supposed to be muted or is it just me? Well, after you've got everything fixed and you got your views all set, and then you were going through the different colors and you were reconstructing the line art,
It
I
went
think
mute?
you were just getting things going. And so now we're back on track.
Yeah, I wonder how much you guys missed. I wonder how much
It was maybe a minute, probably slightly less than a minute.
Alright, so, alright. Well, I was choosing a color, I suppose. So, we can stick with green. So just to recap what I just did over the past minute is basically I set up the modifier, I chose the collection, I chose the layer, which is kind of like a Photoshop layer of your grease pencil, and I chose the material, which is kind of like the brush color type. If you want, you can also choose vertex colors. And I've set up the line art modifier works from the camera, and this gives us kind of a strong basis for how we want to work this design. So right now the lines are quite thick. So what we can do is we can define if the lines are based on screen space thickness or if the design based on world space thickness. So which one would you guys think is best for general projects? Do you think screen space thickness or world space thickness is better, and for what reason? Do you guys know how that works in general? There we go. Nice and thin. Cool. Well, basically, just say that again.
Oh, so you mean like something like screen space thickness would be a kind of it'd almost be like a painterly aesthetic, but like if you have world space thickness, it would be almost like each object's outline was, I don't know, part of itself.
That's right. So this is kind of like a trade-off that you want. So for example, here when I zoom out, notice that the lines go thinner, but they remain relatively thick to what that object is. So I zoom in, the lines go thicker. I zoom out, the lines are thinner. This is world space stroke thickness. So if you go into the stroke settings, down here in the bottom right, the stroke settings here in the green icon or the squiggly icon, you have world space. But if I chose screen space, I'm going to have a resolution and a pixel thickness based on the actual screen. So if I zoom in, the lines remain the same thickness, but they go thinner or thicker the further away something is. So they get all mashed up together because the thing is far away, which is more realistic to how 2D animation actually works. You draw something far away with really thick lines and less detail. You draw something out close with more lines, but the lines are still the same. So that's the difference between screen space thickness and world space thickness. So here's the tricky part. If I hit render, the screen space thickness, even though in my viewport is this thick, if I hit render, it's not going to be this thick. It's going to be based on the actual dimensions of my render. So you have to measure your pixels. So for example, if you want 10 pixel lines and screen space, you got to make sure you're working in 10 pixel lines, but in the viewport, they will look bigger than your actual camera. So there's a little bit of a preview discrepancy when you use screen space because it's based on pixel size, it's not relative. So here it is. They're about 10 pixels wide, or no, maybe a bit less. But in the viewport, they look a little bit thinner or thicker, depending on what I want. But we can work with that. But right now, for the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to use world space. Okay, so now we go to the next important part, the really actually not too hard part. If we go back to our modifiers, we have the Lineart modifier. Arthur, nice to see you here. I'm basically just talking about how to bake Lineart and how to apply the Lineart modifier to an object nice and quickly to get some performance. And then we're going to take a look at rigging this so that we can like maybe move his jaw a little bit and it would move the grease pencil with it. So perfect timing, you wanted to make some anime stuff. Nice one. Okay, so we want faster frame rates than this. So we'll turn it off. Woohoo, beautiful, nice and fast. Turn it on and it is really slow. Not very good for animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate and then we're going to apply. This is can't be applied in sculpt mode. So you've got to be in object mode, then hit apply. And then we're going to tumble the view to the other side here. We're going to duplicate and we're going to apply. Now if we hide the frame rate, we can see that we've got some line art that has been cooked into it, but immediately we can see that the line art is now actually working how we want it to be. It is running fast and we still have some interesting lines. Now these lines won't be dynamic, but we have enough lines to kind of give us or help us save some time. So let's just delete that frame again, start again, and hide it. And now we're going to, like, for example, I'm just going to do a frontal shot. I'm going to duplicate it and go back to object mode, hide the liner, and then just apply. So now I have this like frontal line here, and I can use my sculpt tools, for example, to bring out or to line up the lines that I want. And I can use, for example, my drawing tools with my erase tool. So in my erase tool, whoops, I can like start cleaning up the lines that I don't want. For example, this one on the head here, I can clean that up. And I can clean up whatever lines that I want to keep that has been automatically generated, so I can store them or keep them for later with my rig. So for example, on the lips, I don't really want a lot of lines on the lips. Maybe on the nose I can minimize it a little bit. And so I have a nice fast quick generation of my line art that I need for my character. So now that he's slightly cleaner, I got a couple of extra lines here and there that I don't need. I can also draw in my lines using the surface and then draw in, whoops, that's a bit too thick. So we just want 10 pixels. So draw in about here, just draw in the lines that I actually want to keep on the character. Move it in. So I have like a general concept of how I want my character to be. And you can already tell that as I move around and do different things like this, it's a lot faster than what it used to be. And I can use this to kind of get performance by baking, by applying my line art instead of using it live as an actual keyframe. And this is what you quote, this is the basics of baking in your line art for performance. So now we can move on to the next topic. Do you have some questions that you'd like me to repeat or about the process, more or less? Or is it nice and clear enough to start rigging? Oh, Arto, congratulations on your new laptop, by the way. Well, if you guys want to make this into a pencil, just a quick little tip, you can download some in Blender Artists. There's some grease pencil free assets that you can use, including pencils and pens and different things like that, which you can download for free. But I'll probably need to dig up the information. But basically, if you want, for example, to make this look like pencil, what you would do is you would use dots or squares, or just a line, and change it to texture. And then when you're in texture, you want to choose a texture that has an alpha material. So if you go into, for example, my textures, my brush textures, take a look at what I have. So for example, these 3D drops. You choose something with an alpha, and then you can choose the, if you want the color of the material or the texture blend is 0, meaning it is the color of the texture. Notice that they went white. But if you want it to be the texture of the material, just put the blend up to 1. After that, we've got kind of like this pen texture going on, which is really nice. And this is based on a UV factor. So the higher the UV factor, the more stretched the texture. The less the UV factor, the more repeated the texture. So as you can see, it's repeated here. So I usually just like kind of gonna get like a halfway point to kind of get my style that I want, like this. You can turn on so self-overlap, kind of cleans things up a little bit, but here's the lines that I want. And obviously I can change the color to something a lot more like pencil, like a kind of a bluish gray. And now I've got, maybe I can change the thickness a little bit. So let's go back to my stroke. In my stroke, I have adjustments on the layer, on my lines. On the lines here on the layer, you can change the thickness of your entire layer. So you can do an adjustment. Underneath adjustments, you can change the tint of the color, and you can also change the stroke thickness on top of what you've drawn, so it's dynamic. So now I have a dynamic stroke on my face. So now let's get some rigging, and let's keep it nice and green so we can see it. And let's just show how to quickly rig some grease pencils to your mesh. So who here has done rigging? Oh, and Arto is developing a B4Artist panel for his Node++ add-on. That's very nice of you. And also, is this character going to be part of the music video? Yes, he's not finished. He's just a block out right now, but he will be used in the music video. Darren has rigged sails, like boat sails, really? That's impressive, like with cloth. That's very impressive. Arthur has done rigging as well. You have tried to make a humanoid leopard as your very first Blender project. Wow, that's quite impressive. Mascot for your school. Very nice. A human leopard. That's how you started Blender, making a mascot for your school. Very cool. Okay, so I guess rigging is, people know what it is. You know what it is, you know what it's for. I guess now it's time to like just get some basic principles started. So we're going to go in the orthographic view mode, and we're going to basically go to the add armature single bone. And before we begin, we're going to make sure the viewport display is in front always to show the name as well. So we have this bone called bone. We're going to position it onto the head like this. And we're going to go into edit mode. So now that we're in edit mode, bones are basically a container. You have an armature container. And this armature container basically gives you an idea of like, well, you have bones. And with that, you can either duplicate a bone and use it to create what you need. Or you can subdivide bones, like here underneath the armature options. I could subdivide the bone, which is under here, armature subdivide. And blend is the same. And you can create what you need to move things around. Obviously, this bone is not in the center, so we'll just make sure everything is in the center. Oops. Oh wait, it is in the center. The head is not in the center, so let's just move the head over. There we go. So basically, when you start rigging, you need to realize that green is your front axis and X is your left and right axis. Green is front and back, X is left and right. Why is this important? It's because when you start rigging, you have some options in your rig to automatically name your bones based on the world location. So here underneath names, you can auto name your bones left and right, front and back, top and down. And with that, you can start to create symmetry. So if you start rigging always facing Y front with X left and right, then you're good. Z is up and down. So keep that in mind when you start to make your rigs. It's very important. So now that we have this bone for the jaw, I'm going to go back to the side view. I'm going to create another bone for like the nose, for example, just to like a preservation, and we're just going to basically animate the jaw and the mouth. That's all we need for today. And so we can wait. Let's just name this bone. We'll call this the nose, and we'll call this one the jaw, and we'll call this one the head. We're going to parent the nose and the jaw to the head using Control P, or in Blender would be Control P, but I haven't assigned that shortcut. Make parent, Control P. We'll keep the offset, and that's basically it. Oh, Toxic Tuber. Cool, yeah. As soon as I finish this little rig, let's take a look at your art, and also at Slink's art. We have Slink's Nature Pack, and some of your combining through the waves, relaxing Blender geometry nodes, motion graphics. Very nice. Alright, so in this case, I'm just going to use a simple rig. So I'm going to select the head and then select the rig, press Control P to parent, and I'm going to use with automatic weights, armature deform with automatic weights. And with the mustache, I'm going to select this bone in pose mode, and then I'm going to Control P and I'm going to use the bone relative. So the difference between parenting by bone and parenting by bone relative is important. I highly recommend you use bone relative. The reason being is that if I just do bone, my mustache is going to be parented to the bone. But if I do any changes to the bone, my mustache is going to move. It is fixed. It's in an absolute position to the bone. If I use bone relative, this means I can make changes to the bone, nose, and the mustache will stay in the same place. So just to give you a quick example, let's first parent it by bone. And let's now go to edit mode, move the bone, go back to pose mode, and notice that the mustache moved because I moved the bone. This is an absolute parenting, but that's not what I wanted. So in this case, I'm going to unparent the mustache, clear and keep transforms, go back to the nose bone, and I'm going to use bone relative. Now, if I go back to edit mode and move the bone and go back to object mode, the mustache stays in the same place. This is bone relative parenting, right? So it's good to be a relative parent, you know, super flexible, understanding of your kids, you know. So relative bone rigging is important when you do your parenting of your objects, so that you can move your bones, edit your bones, and your objects will remain in the same place. I'm going to do the same with the jaw. Back into pose mode, Control P, bone relative. In this case, why did it jump? Oh, that's because he's parented to something else. No, parent, bone relative. There we go. So now that we have a basic weight of the head and the basic jaw line like this, how do we connect the rest of the grease pencil to the character? That I'm not so sure. No, actually I do know. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the grease pencil, and if we take a look at the grease pencil properties down below, we have something called Vertex Groups. This Vertex Groups is the same concept as this head for the weight maps. So here underneath Vertex Groups, notice that we have the head bone, the jaw bone, and the nose bone. Because of that, we have, if we go to weight paint mode, we can select the nose bone, which has the weights of the nose, the head bone, which is the weights around the head. So for example, I can add in the weights of the backbone here, which is all good. Make it nice and solid. Same with the neck. And we have the jawbone down here. So these are weights. This is what we need on the grease pencil. So in the grease pencil, what we're going to do is we're going to select the grease pencil and then select the rig, Control P to parent, and automatic weights again. So now if we take a look at the grease pencil vertex groups, we have the head, the jaw, and the nose, and that's basically it. The only difference is that it's in a strange place. It's underneath onion skinning, underneath the layers. So if you were lost and you didn't know how to do this before, yes, it's inconsistent because we don't have actual vertex groups within the grease pencil data, but inside the stroke, I guess you could say the stroke tab or the Lineart tab, we do have vertex groups which we can use to rig. So now if we go into weight paint mode, which is the same here, weight paint, we can select the jaw and the nose, and we start to see which button or which parts of the grease pencil actually has different weights. So let's go to the jaw, and we can paint. In this case, the automatic painting is not great, so we're going to paint it manually. We go into the head, we're going to select all the ones from the head, paint in the correct shapes, go into the nose, we'll paint in the eyebrows as well, and we'll just make sure everything is normalized. Normalize all vertex groups. Don't lock the active, which is underneath weights, same here. You can generate with empty groups, or you can smooth, normalize. We'll just smooth them a little bit. We'll do a couple of iterations as well. And now, when we move the jaw with the grease pencil, it is now attached to the head, and it's moving with the head. And obviously, for example, we can start focusing on different parts of the weights. For example, if we select the head, if you hold down Control, you can select the bones while in weight paint mode. If you select both the head and then the actual bone in pose mode, head, bone, pose mode, select the head again, weight paint mode, then you can Control click the different bones so you can choose which weights go where. The same thing with the grease pencil. Select the grease pencil, then the rig, and then go into pose mode, then select the grease pencil, go into weight paint mode, and then you can select the different bones. Whoops, again, hey, you can't. Oh, I have to check that and see why. But now I can like just weight paint the different things. So back in the pose mode, weight paint, I select that, weight paint mode, select the head, and I can fix this part at the bottom here a little bit. Or you can use the side here, which is also useful as well, and we can fix that up. So now, in this case, now I've attached my grease pencil using rigging or basic rigging so that I can use the actual pencils on the actual character to start animating the pencils. So here it is, it's moving around, it's doing what it needs to do, more or less, a very basic rig. But the grease pencils are now attached to the actual character. And if we go back to the grease pencil and the layer settings, we can go back to strokes, we can change it to screen space if we need it to, so that we can move anything around, and we're good to go. So those are the first two topics. How do you rig your grease pencil to your characters? It's the same as rigging normal weights. You just need to like make sure you have your weights painted after you've done the automatic weighting. So this is a little bit more of a manual process to set it up. I gave a quick tip about how to do, what's the difference between bone parenting and bone relative parenting. And I gave you a quick introduction of how to bake your Lineart modifier data so that your rigging process is possible. By the way, you cannot rig dynamic Lineart modifiers to your character. You do have to bake them anyway. So there's a trade-off there, but that's okay. Maybe you can use some Lineart modifiers on the contour, which is maybe less expensive, and maybe you can bake everything else. So for example, I'm here in the Lineart modifier. I'm going to move it below the armature, and I'm going to only use the edge types of the contour, and then turn it back on. Go back into the camera. Let's check the playback, press play. We still get 15 frames per second compared to off 30 frames per second. But it got erased. Everything got erased. Damn it. What happened? Grease pencil. Oh, here it is. It's good to have. The problem with grease pencils is that layers are also keyframes. So if you're before your keyframe, it will disappear. And then we can turn that on. So press play. 15 frames per second. It's still pretty slow, but you could, like, for example, just show that contour dynamically based on the render. So you can animate without it. So just have it hidden in viewport for performance reasons. And when you render, you can see the contour frames as well around the head. So there we go. All right, so Slink's not here, but TT, you're here. Hey, TT, would you like to go onto the microphone before I share your video? And we can take a quick look. Just to give us a bit of context of your art piece. Oh, you like people talking about your stuff. All right, so I guess that's up to me. So let's take a quick look and a listen. He says you've got no mic. Okay, that's no problem. So I'll just give it a quick watch. Did you make the music as well? If you're on Twitch or YouTube, you can hear the music, hopefully. made the soundscape as well. You've written better music before in your own opinion. The soundscape looks so nice. This reminds, do you remember back in the day when you guys played with like these little circles of plastic and then use wax paper and a hot iron to kind of fusion the plastic together to create these little patterns like real life pixel art? Do you remember that toy? Gambitron remembers this toy. This reminds me a lot of that. There we are. Whoa, whoa. Gambitron says, I've got a friend who does cosplay as a business and they make little giveaway things with these little toys. Maybe out of hers, maybe he's too young to understand what it is. TD is kind of like a spirograph, if you mean that, possibly.
They're called perler beads, P-E-R-L-E-R.
Perler beads?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, that's what it is. P-U-R or P-E-R?
P-E.
Perler beads.
That's the dad of 2 daughters.
And they know. Here it is. I used to play with this all the time when I was a kid. So you have these little plastic beads. And then you run them on like a grid thing. And then you run some wax paper and heat it up with hot iron. And they melt, and you can use that to create circular pixel art, I suppose. So TT gives us a little bit of context on the art of his video. Basically, the concept is that they are similar to what a spirograph is. Hey, Gamitron, you would love that concept. He says, it's kind of a spirograph. So as a spirograph, the title hints it is inspired by watching someone comb geometric forms into the sand of a Zen garden. And also TT now understands what we're going on with the beads from the round circles that are flying around, yeah. But it is beautiful. How you made it is also quite interesting too, with the fall off. I think it's really beautiful too. Like a rake with a fall off.
I think the rake fall off effect makes the whole thing.
Yeah. It's magic. There's also, you got some symmetry going on, which I think is really clever as well. And the little pipes just sinking down. It is very nice.
I like the use of the side of the screen, both where it actually stops there, it goes away from, it comes in from, it goes out from. Like if it was just a camera shot from far away, it would be just like watching synchronized swimming. Whereas like there it used the wall, and then here it comes from off the wall. Like I think the camera selection was really good too.
Yeah, it's quite nice. And I like how the rotation pivot also changes, like left, right, and then it spins around. That's quite clever as well, the dynamic pivot. It's all made in Blender, nice. Yoms recommends maybe a slow fly through or a different composition could also help. I mean, you could work many colors. Many cameras. You could extend this entire animation to about 10 minutes if you wanted to. Just with the different things or variations you could use. Oh, it's 2 projects. Artifriz says the shapes reminds me of MasterChef. MasterChef. Oh, so you had one scene creating the black and white image sequence, and then you used GeoNodes to create the drivers from the black and white image. Is this what you did? Oh, the symbol from MasterChef. TT says yes. I think I got it right. Well done. Not people cooking. Also here it looks like a Wi-Fi signal a little bit, but that's nice. You can read it as however you want. Well, that's interesting. So you made like an image texture that you looped around or generated using shader nodes, I assume. And with that, you drove the displacement of the position and the color of all the little tubes. Now the tubes actually geometry, or is it displaced geometry? Like, are they separate tubes, or did you displace the shape? TT's writing. They are cylinders. Alright. Very cool. Well, thanks for that piece. I've seen a lot of your work, TT, over the years, or over the past 2 years, since I first met your work, and you've got quite a knack for making your soundscapes and music with your visuals, so I think this is one of your higher quality ones. Quite nice. You mentioned that even though it's simple geometry, your PC was having a hard time, it was aching. Makes sense. How many cylinders do you think were used in this scene? And did you use camera culling as well? He is writing. Having each instance with its own color means you had to realize all of the instances. Oh yes, of course. I wonder if you could get more performance if you used a Boolean mask on which instances you realized and which ones you didn't. So all of these cylinders are simple geometry with a single subdivision. You're right, he says camera culling could have helped. Darren says he said Boolean. How do you say Boolean? Am I saying it incorrectly?
No, I was just joking that around the procedural community, it feels like every time you say Boolean, it's like you're cussing or swearing and saying a dirty word because it's not performant or because the underlying topology is going to be messed up, or like it's a dirty backward, don't do it kind of thing. I always feel like everybody says Boolean, everybody else says, don't do it, no.
No, don't do a Boolean, yeah. It's going to cause errors, yeah. There was one point where I used Booleans with some rigs that I created earlier, where I joined the arms was like this peanut butter or something. And I was creating the peanut butter with Booleans, but the problem was even at fast or slow, every now and then in the render, they would glitch, and you would see this huge spike shoot out of his armpit, and it would look disconcerting. It would happen like every 5 frames or something. So TT says, thanks for enjoying my MoGraph thingies, Jace. Yeah, enjoying this was easy, thank you for making this. And rendering it out, I know that's an effort. R2 says Booleans is the Voldemort of proceduralism. And TT says Booblian. Oh dear, sorry. Okay, so Slink, he's not here at the moment, so I'll just quickly review it. Hopefully he will join in later. But basically he's given an update to his foliage nature pack, and it's available for free on Gumroad. And in his nature pack, he's got 4 models of grass and weeds, semi-photorealistic, and he's also added 5 models of trees, which is quite nice. So I will have to take a look at this later to give a review, but from what I know, you're pretty good at what you do. I've also been making models of trees for game assets as well. And it's very light. Or is it in the URL? Oh, yeah, it's in the URL. That's why it's so light. Okay, so have you guys used geometry nodes to merge collections before? Or have you guys created game assets before? Oh, it's 500 megs. Okay, got it. Yeah, merging, like combining or joining. Arthur Frears is asking. Decap says no, never. Okay. Merging collections says Darren. Is like, what? Nobody? Okay. So let me load up a quick little scene here. And I'll just save this for later. And I'm going to use a new scene here. Nice and clean. Or I could just use a new scene from here. So basically, when you're creating game assets, you may have, for example, here in the outliner, let's take a look at this furniture scene, which is nice and small. Okay, that's fine. So here in my furniture scene for game assets, let me just compile the shaders. Basically, when you create game assets, you have hundreds of assets sometimes. Hundreds and hundreds of different models with the LODs. Arthur is trying to confirm, like joining, exactly, like meshes or loose parts, exactly. So in game assets, you may have an object that is made out of multiple objects. So for example, let's take a look at this shield here. So this shield is a basic game asset that my friend Early from the north of Colombia here, he created this, and I created the trim sheets and the materials. Another artist, Memo, he helped sculpt the wood and I baked the rest, and with that we created this trim sheet to create different types of props. For example, this barrel here, for example, little simple game asset props, relatively low poly, but using one texture we can create many different objects, including this lamp here, or this this little bucket. We can, a whole bunch of little different assets, right? A bench. But every now and then, hey, I wonder why this doesn't have the correct trim sheet. It's probably his bad UVs. There it is. Just they weren't generated. That's strange. Okay, so out of this object, typically, I have, for example, in just this one scene, I have this many different types of objects. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Okay, more than 25 different props. So if I was going to export this to a game engine, typically I would need to join everything manually, like this, or join it together, but some of them have modifiers, so I'd have to apply the modifiers, join them together, and then set up the UVs and the vertex colors and everything. So for example, if I have my game engine with some dynamic materials, for example moss and snow, I would like, for example, underneath these legs there would be no moss and no snow, but on top of it there would be moss and snow. Or I just want moss and snow on the legs and nowhere else because people are sitting on the bench, so there's no snow and no moss on the bench. It's for storytelling. So to do that, I would need to paint vertex colors to export with my FBX, and I would need to also think about my UVs. So for example, each object should have 4 UV maps. The first UV map is for the trim sheet, the second UV map is for the light map baking, the third UV map is for ambient occlusion baking, which I'm going to add edge wear baking on a 4th UV map. So I have 4 UV maps that I call inside my game engine. So just describing this, I would have to repeat merging 25 groups of objects, applying the modifiers, and rebaking all the UVs, and setting up all of their vertex colors one by one by one. Repeat this 200 times, 300 times, depends on the asset pack. So this is not an ideal workflow. So what do you do? Darren says he'd rather take an arrow to the knee than to have to manually combine each of these assets. All right, I love that. I felt the frustration in the one by one. Yes, you're right. I'm glad you do. So this is where things become happy when you use geometry nodes. So I have created this geometry nodes group called a freezer. Basically, a freezer is, if we take a closer look at the geometry nodes, it's basically this. If I zoom in nice and close, I just get a collection. I get a collection data. I join the geometry together, and I realize the instances, and I set that information into one single object. So this basically takes my collection, makes it dynamic, and I make it one object. So if we take a look at, for example, this armament rack, or sorry, let's just focus on one, like this wood pile here. So we'll just hide the wood pile. Whoops, I hid everything. There we go, wood pile. So if I take a look at this wood pile, it's one object now. It's like one geometry nodes tree. If I take a look at the collection, let's collapse everything and let's find the wood pile, which is here, and unhide it. If we take a look at the wood pile and move this to the side here, oh, there's a different wood pile. This is wood pile number 2. Where is it? Here it is, number 2. Here we go. So I have one object, and if I move it, you can see here that if I move the object or if I duplicate it, it is now reflecting as one object here. This is the first thing. And if I add, for example, a modifier to this, for example, a bevel, you can see that the wood with the bevel is now, it's working and it's merged into one object. But hang on a minute. Where are the UVs? Why does this look so different to this? Can you guys guess? Oh, Quacker says he feels like the guy who would actually waste his time combining all of these by hand. And also, why do I need to join? I don't need to join. Bring in the UVs as an attribute. Easy. You need to reset the shader. Okay, people are not sure. Okay, so the problem with using UVs as an attribute, let's take a look at the attributes here. We have 0 attributes that we can use. And in the material, if we take a look at the material here, I could use this mapping here, or I could use the UV attribute, which is great, but I cannot export this as an FBX. I cannot export attributes in FBXs. I can't use this in Unreal Engine. I cannot use this in Unity. I can't use geometry nodes attributes anywhere unless I'm using Alembic. But in this case, for performance reasons, where you have to use FBX for most games. So what I need to do is I need to use Blender 3.2, which has a new operator. So if I take a copy of this, when I'm happy with all my edits, for example, this mesh here, I make a copy, I go inside my modifier stack, and I apply the modifier stack. Now that I have applied the modifier stack, I have this attribute, mappa UV, right? It's a face corner 2D vector, which is the UV map attributes, which I have. But I can't, if I look at my UV maps here, it doesn't exist. So before I export, in this case, per object, or you could make a script, I just convert the attribute, I choose the UV map type, and it converts the attribute to actual UV map data. And lo and behold, because I converted the data to UV maps, now works like it would work in a game engine. So here's the one with just the attributes live so that I can change it. So there's step 1, make the model and then collection. Step 2, join the collection so it's one object so I don't have to think about and save time. And also I save time on the FBX export, because when you export an FBX, you have to apply all the modifiers. And also, instances from geometry nodes do not work with FBX collections as well. So that's another option. If this was an instance from an FBX collection, FBX instance, point instance, for example, I would have to join the collection first before I can export to FBX, because instances inside, unless I realize the instances and make them and apply them and convert them into actual geometry, then the FBX will not export. So using this method, which realizes the whole entire collection and joins them together as one mesh, you don't have to do that manually. It just does it automatically. So after that, I got to convert my UV map attributes into actual UV maps. And now I can export this as a single object. So with this object, I can turn this into a collection. So for example, I use Hager's Tools, which is a add-on by Stephen here in the server. He has a system called Move Selected Collection and Name It as well. So it creates a collection name right here. And now I can use like a scene called export or whatever that I need, so that I can batch export here in the save dialog, batch mode, use the active scene collections. And with that, I can export one object per collection and export all of the 25 objects with the settings that I need from FBX, which is X forward and Y up. And geometry, I need to have only normals as well. Apply modifiers, sure, why not, whatever. Sometimes they're not necessary in this case. And export the 25 objects with one click. And then click and drag the 25 into Unreal Engine and import everything with one click and drag. So that's the concept of the case. So that's how you use geometry nodes. A very simple tree, super simple, to help you merge your collection data into one object, and then using the process of converting your attributes, which is in Blender 3.2, convert attribute, convert your UV maps into normal maps, and same with vertex colors. And then you can help save time exporting your meshes. Auto says you got to turn it into a script. Talking to scripts, if you guys are interested into Python, this can also help you automate these this type of work. So for example, here in this script here, let me just zoom in and make it full screen. So if I zoom in here, this script here basically says, I have, for example, if you remember earlier, the UV map name was called UV Mappa because one other artist added a UV map name that was incorrect. And unfortunately, I have a standard, I guess you could say, with this project. So let me just bring up my standard, which is based on here. I have a standard of UV0 is the wood, UV1 is my secondary material, UV2 is my custom rock material, and UV3 is my AO edge and cavity material, the edgeware. So I need to make sure all my UV maps are in the correct order, the correct names, and the correct way of packing. So UV3, and then on top of it, UV5 would be the light map, or UV2, I think. Doesn't really matter. I generate them automatically generally, but if you were using light maps, then you would do that. So in this case, I need to make sure some of my UV map names of 1,000 different objects, in fact, just in this one scene that I have here with the roofs, I have 6,300 objects with 31,000 instances. And the 6,300 objects have inconsistent UV names. Some of them are called UV map, other ones are called UV channel 1. And so, do I rename 6,000 objects one by one just so I have my UV maps? UV mapper. Yes and no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to waste my time. So in this case, as an artist, sometimes learning a little bit of code can go a long way. Because imagine me selecting an object, going to the UV map, double clicking on the UV map, changing the name of the UV map, confirm the UV map change name, select the next object, double click on the UV map, change the name of the UV map, double click to confirm, double click on the UV map again on the next object, change. Okay, it's insanity. So in this case, a little bit of code like this can go a long way. So I used some people don't recommend, like whatever works. But in this case, I used a for and an in. This is really for and in, for in x. This bpy.context.selectedObject is extremely useful inside Blender for all of your modeling needs. For x in, this means do this for all of your selected objects. That's basically what it means. So for example, Blender is infamous for if I had 1, 2, 3, 4, if I have all these different objects selected, it's always going to focus on the active one. So I have 4 of them, but I hit an operator and the operator only runs on this one unless I hold down Alt. But in scripting, it's a little bit different, and sometimes when I hold down Alt, it doesn't work for everything. So Blender is very inconsistent with that concept of multiple objects or selected objects, and that is a very unfortunate, non-production friendly way of working. So sometimes using scripting will help you. To do that, you just use a for x. X is like whatever the loop is happening inside the inside this context. So the BPY context, BPY is your Blender API access. Context is like, okay, so what do I think about? And then you just say selected underscore objects. This gives us, whoops, I spelled it wrong. This gives us all of the list of objects that we have inside of that collection, right? So we have 4 different objects that are selected here inside the context. So this says, so for every x inside this context, list every object. So in this case, I can say, all right, for all of the context of the UV data inside the UV selected objects data, which is the UV data, I can select the UV data UV layers, I can list them, and then I use a while integer or whatever, and I just say if the name is this, then change it. If it's not that, then leave it alone. I just use a little bit if-else statement with a while statement to help me kind of do some logic. Like, okay, so computer, do the work for me. So whenever I run this script with everything selected, of the 6,000 objects, I press the button once, and the 6,000 objects in a couple of seconds does all the UV fixing that I need, and I'm happy. Or another option that you can do is you can use this add-on called the Action Editor. So let's take a look at what the Action Recorder add-on. So basically the Action Recorder add-on, so if I have a couple of actions, let's go to the main view, it creates a new tab, and the Action Recorder add-on basically records a macro for you. So for example, I have all these objects here and I need to rotate them like this, and then I need to scale them like this, and then but in local, all right? So let's go to local view, individual regions, and I need to do this, and then this, and then this for all of the objects, and then I need to repeat it for this one, and this one, all after another, right? I need to repeat everything. So if I do it manually, it's going to be a pain in the butt, right? So what I need to do is I need to create a macro. So if I use the Action Recorder add-on, which is free, I can create a local action. I'm going to call this the rotation scale move action. And then I'm going to hit record. So I'm going to hit record. I'm going to rotate. I'm going to scale. And I'm going to move down. Hit stop. And it records these movements. And if I hit play, or I do it on multiple objects, I have just repeated the action on everything that I just wanted to do. So if I create any objects, like this sphere, well, maybe a sphere is not a good example. So let's get a cube. And I want to repeat it on these 2 cubes. I just hit play, and I've just stored my repeated action for later. It doesn't record everything because the Blender API is not easy compared to many other softwares, because this is object-oriented Python. But this is the easier way of doing macros. I guess you could say some things work, some things don't. For example, they have some examples here of deleting or subdividing and smoothing and smart UV projection, which is the one I have, or creating my UV groups. So for example, remember that I said that I needed 4 UV groups. So if I run this action, which is a global one stored for later, I now have UV1, 0 to 3 with my 4 layers with, and I can just click it like on any number of different times. If I do it with these 3, I have 1 UV map, hit the macro, and now all of them, it doesn't have it for all of them, sorry, damn, so I have to do one by one. Really? Let's try that again. Yeah, this is why I use scripting instead, because usually operators inside add-ons, they only work on active mostly, depending on the operator. So if you don't want to work so hard and you're a lazy person and you just don't want to click on 6,000 objects to do the same thing over and over again like an insane person, then learn a little bit of Python, especially 4x in BPY context selected objects, then run whatever command you want. And if you want to loop things, learn how to type in Google and answer, how do I loop in Python? How do I use the if-else condition? What is the for in the for inside Python? And then learn a little bit about the context of the Python API of Blender, which is always starting with import at the beginning of your script, import BPY, and then here in the BPY, if you hold down period and then press Control Space or autocomplete, this will give you some clues. So you could say, what is the app? What is context? The 2 that you're going to use the most is context and data. Everything else is useful for other things as well. But this can help you save hundreds of boring hours of work. I hope that helps you guys. So Arto says, you don't even need to learn code, just go into the info tab and copy and paste. That's right, which is down here. You can copy and paste those commands, which helps. Now the only thing you need to know is to loop, which I highly agree, and also conditionals, if else. He made an add-on this way. And looping through all the items, yes, that's exactly what you would need to do. Someone else mentioned, why don't you just use a for loop instead of a while loop? Yeah, that's probably better. Obviously, whatever works, works. And another TT says a good workaround for all of them is like set the pivot point to the individual origin and it should work for them all as part of the macro. TT says using macros is interesting. You can also create a macro for a macro. So Superviren says, as a computer scientist, I can confirm that learning code is equivalent to learning how to do Google Stack Overflow queries. Yes, pretty much. So hopefully that's useful for you guys. And yeah, I can change this for the for instead of a while. I don't know why I used a while instead of a for, but I was tired yesterday. And I don't know a lot of Python, but I just don't want to work a lot sometimes. As I said, 6,000 objects joining together for 100 different pieces of models. She knows can fix some things, but it can't do everything. So there we go. That's it for today. Do you guys have more questions before I finish today? Artie says, make me a script that does all the work for me. And Simperviren says, whatever works, works. It is not less efficient or anything. Whatever works, works. That is right. Can I full screen the script, please? Sure. So this is just a variable, yeah? Variables are kind of like, just to make things a little bit easier to write. So for example, instead of writing BPY context, I would write, for example, BC. BC for BPY.context. So in this case, instead of writing this over and over again, I'll just write BC. And this would take the variable there, and this would read what that says. It's just to help you save time for later. The for x in, so if I say print x, it means print every iteration of the selected objects. So then inside of the for loop, I define some more shorthand, I guess you could say, that I can use for later. And same with this one, UV index. This one's not necessary. And then I define this as my data UV layers because I use it a lot. And just to be sure, I print the UV index. When I do that, for example, if I run the script, I can see this here. So this little button up here, run in console, typically you have to open up the console here to see what's happening. And so when you press play up here, you'll see nothing here. You'll say that the script ran, but you see nothing. So you have to turn up the console to see what happens. This add-on here, run in console, which is done by Tinwotin, which is a very good add-on. You can run the script inside the console directly. There's also this panel here that you can use to tab to different scripts when you need them. You also have a little micro view thing, and you also have the ability to see the tabs, the minimap, the inside, show the white space or not, and you have it a number of different things as well. Those are some pretty good add-ons that I recommend for the script editor. Another thing that I recommend for script editing is learning basically those three things. What is the for, what is an if-else, and how to declare selected objects. If you can learn those three things, the for, if-else, and how to declare selected objects with Python, that's enough to automate boring work inside Blender. You don't need to learn all of the crazy fancy stuff. Just learn those three things and you're good to go. BC is for before Christ.
Good evening.
Hello, Steve. How you doing?
Not bad. Sorry, I missed the... What does the script actually do?
It basically, this script just checks the name of my UV channels, and if the name is incorrect, it would change it. That's all it does. But it would do it for my 6,000 objects that I needed. Because I had some inconsistent UV names inside my objects that I needed to fix. That's basically all it does.
That is all.
Yeah, that is all. Good, I'm glad you asked your question.
I just wanted to know if I could help or make it. But you already have it, so...
I mean, it's a very custom script, so like it's not going to work for anything else. But it'll be kind of tricky to make an automated thing. I think Blender just needs to Alt, left click everything, absolutely everything. But it doesn't.
There is a tool with Haggis that will rename the UV map to the same as the object.
No, in this case I needed custom UV names.
Right.
Yeah, because I have 6,000 objects and 6,000 different names. That's not going to be useful.
No. Assume you want the same UV map.
Exactly.
For all the objects. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's all.
All right. Does anyone else have any more? And also TT ask, and BPY is before post? Yeah, HWH. Oh, BPY is just my written command here. You got to import BPY to just say, tell the Python script to call the Blender API. Decap asks another question. Did you ever figure out any further solutions to the temporal consistency problem with grease pencil animations with noise on the Lineart modifier thickness? Oh, there was an answer for Artifrias. Okay. Did I ever forget any further solutions to the temporal consistency problem with grease pencil animations with noise on the Lineart modifier thickness? Is this a modifier? So for example, if I go back to my other scene, when it comes to animation for, I guess, the modifier for the thickness, here we go. Influence, thickness factor, uniform thickness. I made it jitter on purpose with my noise, like randomizing the noise a little bit of my pencil inside the renders here. For example, with this video. I kind of embraced the noise of the grease pencil on purpose, but I masked it with like these double lining it or multi-lining it, so that if one line broke, the other line would show. To kind of give me that kind of like drawn over concept and animation. Alright. Darren mentioned something about Dynamesh and ZBrush's newest base mesh generation tool. It's kind of like converting to mesh. To do that, I would probably, let's make a new scene and give that a go. So if I made a grease pencil, oh, here it is. And I drew some things. Let's just make it strength like this, make it bigger. So if this was my model, I would go to object, convert to polygon curve or Bezier curve. Now that it is a Bezier curve, I would let's just hide the grease pencil, get my Bezier curve, give it a geometry, some geometry like extrusion, or sorry, make it a tube, so depth. So I'll just put it into depth like this, maybe up the resolution a little bit, and then if I want to remesh this, I would convert it again to mesh. And then I would use a modifier, the remesh modifier, which is easy to search here. Whoops, not armature. Remesh. And that would give me a rough geometry that I can work with based on my grease pencil. Just change my voxel size. And probably make the voxel size a little bit smaller for higher detail, and that will give me some geometry to work with. As to keep it relatively dynamic. Or, for example, if you don't want to do it like this all the time, for example, here's the other trick that I showed you earlier today. If I'm having my if I have like a mesh that's using an actual collection, so I'm drawing this and I'm turning this into curves and things, and then I'm converting that into a mesh. For example, back into my stroke, I can get the stroke here. Let's just like bring it out a little bit like this, and I convert it to a curve. Did it work? Where's the curve? Curve. Keep original. Why didn't it convert it? Object. Convert to Bezier curve. Ah, there we go, it worked now. Put that into my rig here. and I select my plane, I could do the same concept of like getting the collection info and using the joining and the realizing of the instances with the rig collection so that I can see some things. But for example, realize the instances and also the join geometry, and also probably have to curve to mesh. Curve to mesh. If I'm using curves in this case. But yeah, you can basically, if you want, have a whole bunch of curves converted to mesh, and then inside your actual plane, then apply the remesh modifier. The topology of the remesher, Darren, just to give you an idea, is not good. If you want a quad remeshed object, you would have to use the quad remesh modifier. To do that, you go into sculpt mode and you go to the remesh options. Right now, it's just doing a voxel remesh. But if we go down here inside remesh options, I think it's inside here. Here we go, the remesh options here. We also have a quad remesh. The quad remesh is the quadriflow algorithm, which is inside ZBrush. It's not the newest one, but it's a very popular one that people use to remesh into quads, and you have a whole bunch of options, and this will give you different topology, I suppose. Quadriflow, the mesh needs to be manifold, so that's the problem. You need to get rid of it needs to be closed. So I'm going to select everything, face, let's just say mesh, clean up. In this case, fill holes. Let's make it up into 128 faces, why not? And now let's try this. Still not manifold. Whatever, that's a problem. So I'd have to make curves with caps first. But I think it should be possible using the quadriflow remesh, which I think is very similar to ZBrush. Maybe not as performant, maybe not as crazy good, maybe not a lot of character concepts, but you could technically just use the vertex data remesh in sculpt mode or any mode and just quadri remesh or voxel remesh. Voxel remesh is a little bit faster, just don't beware of your size. Anything larger than 1 million polygons with a remesh is going to practically crash Blender. If it is at 0.1 meters, which is 1 voxel per 10 centimeters, and if this object is, let's take a look at the size of the object. The object is about 2.8 meters, so it's going to be 280 faces long. Yeah, so that's how you design your size. And then with that you have, it's like 1.5 meters tall, so it's going to be pretty much 15 voxels tall. So 15 by 28 voxels gives you so many hundreds of voxels. If you're going up to the hundreds of thousands of voxels or millions of voxels, this is where Blender starts to say, hang on, this is too much for me, and it will crash. So in this case, that's why you don't ever drag the voxel size. You will crash Blender. And just beware of your applied scale of your objects to define how big your voxels really are. That's enough tips for today. I hope you guys enjoyed today, find something useful today, and I will probably catch you next week. If you guys want to open up the microphone, feel free. I will finish the stream here.
Thanks, Trace. It's good stuff.
Oh, you're welcome.
Take care, man. Have a great weekend.
You too.